American motives for imperialism in Puerto Rico. One of the most important motives for imperialism in Puerto Rico was economic. The United States wanted to create a sugar and tobacco industry in Puerto Rico. Another American motive for imperialism in Puerto Rico was that the island's value to the U.S. policymakers was an outlet for manufactured goods and was a good key naval station in the Caribbean. Manifest destiny is the idea that the United States is destined by God and that it was their God-given right to take land to expand. The Americans justified their use of force as manifest destiny. On February 15, 1898, the United States battleship Maine was blown up, apparently by a mine. On April 25th, the United States declared war on Spain because of the sinking of the battleship Maine. There is no confession of how it happened or who did it, but the result was the United States declaring war on Spain. On June 22, 1898, U.S. troops land on Cuban land after being stationed in Tampa, Florida, as a staging ground until they eventually deployed to Cuba. Approximately 25,000 U.S. troops were stationed in Tampa because of how close it was to Cuba, the railroads, and the Deep Bay. The United States troops on July 1, 1898, attacked the San Juan Heights. Dismounted troopers, the African-American 9th and 10th Cavalries, and the Rough Riders were commanded by President Roosevelt to go against Kettle Hill, while the other forces, led by General Kent, charged up San Juan Hill to force the Spanish troops for the inland, while inflicting 1,700 casualties on July 3, 1898. On July 16, 1898, the Spanish surrendered 23,500 troops that were still around the city. Only a few days later, General Nelson Miles sailed to Puerto Rico from Guantanamo, where his forces landed near Ponce, and marched to San Juan with virtually no opposition. The United States and Spain signed the Protocol of Peace on August 12, 1898 in Washington, D.C. Although this ended the conflict, the war could still not be technically over until the treaty was signed. On December 10, 1898, the Treaty of Paris was finally signed. As a result of this treaty, Spain lost their control over the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Guam. The U.S. gained control over these three countries. On April 2, 1900, the Foraker Act was signed as a civil law. The United States passed the Foraker Act as a result of obtaining control over Puerto Rico as part of the agreement that put an end to the Spanish-American War. This act established a civil government in Puerto Rico. The Foraker Act established a civil government, a judicial system, and free commerce between Puerto Rico and the United States, and requiring the removal of a local law that limited the ownership of any one person to 500 acres of land, transforming Puerto Rico's agricultural economy into a sugar monoculture economy, and giving American sugar companies an advantage over the local sugar plantation owners. Section 7 of the Foraker Act also established Puerto Rican citizenship. On May 1, 1900, Charles H. Allen was inaugurated as the first governor of San Juan. In accordance with the Foraker Act of 1900, President William McKinley proposed Charles H. Allen in April of that year to be the first civilian governor of Puerto Rico. On March 2, 1917, former President Woodrow Wilson signed the Jones-Shafroth Act. This act granted Puerto Ricans United States citizenship if they were born on or after April 11, 1899. It also gave them a Bill of Rights. The Jones Act recognized Puerto Rico as an organized but unincorporated U.S. territory. The Jones-Shafroth Act separated the executive, judicial, and legislative branches of the Puerto Rican government and provided civil rights to the individual. Also, created a locally elected bicameral legislature. On October 10, 1922, the United States Supreme Court ruled in the case of Balzac v. Puerto Rico that Puerto Rico was just a territory and that the Constitution did not apply to them. During the Spanish-American War, American intervention in Puerto Rico and Cuba positioned the United States as a dominant force in those nations, changing the course of each nation's independence movements. While ignoring the aspirations of the people of Cuba and Puerto Rico, critics charged the United States with acting in its own interests. In this cartoon from a Boston newspaper, Uncle Sam is seen as a haughty diner debating which nation to eat first, while being served by U.S. President William McKinley. For a number of Spain's former colonies, the conclusion of the Spanish-American War had far-reaching effects. While Cuba gained independence but remained under American control, the United States acquired Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and Guam. This political cartoon from 1898, just before the war came to an end, represents a pro-expansionist viewpoint by contrasting the advantages of American involvement enjoyed by Puerto Rico, dressed in a brand new outfit labeled Annexation Suit from Uncle Sam, and Cuba, carrying bread and waving an independence flag, with the ambiguous status of the Philippines, which is portrayed as trapped in a primitive, savage state. Typically, the three countries are portrayed as dependent children who rely on a caring and kind Uncle Sam. In this political cartoon, notice that the countries are portrayed as babies causing trouble for their frazzled father. Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and Hawaii are portrayed as babies. They are causing trouble for their father. This relates to paternalism because Americans believed that these countries were uncivilized.